Right, hello, greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern again. Gosh, the weeks go past so quickly. It's my fasting Sunday again. And it's the 9th of October. And the summer is pretty much coming to an end, although here in France, in the middle of France, sorry, it's the 10th of October. You see, even the days flash past. It was the 9th of October, and where's that gone? I've been listening to two novels simultaneously, which I've always wanted to listen to as a talking book in the evenings for relaxation. One is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And Hans Castorp, the hero, at least at the beginning of the novel, is talking about the nature of time. Very interesting section. Yeah, time's very odd. But anyway, today is the 10th of October, and I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts. The other novel I'm listening to on alternate evenings is Hermann Hesse's Glass Bead Game, which I have to say I never read. I read all his other work in my teens and early youth, but I never managed to get through the Glass Bead Game, so here we are, lockdown, pandemic, end of the world here in France, and so that's two great masterpieces I've always wanted to, to have the time actually to study. And during my busy teaching career, I never had time to do them justice. So, anyway, I hope you're well, and I hope you're bringing your highest intellectual and spiritual, ambitions to fruition. I'm going to start by, I want to just introduce here behind my shoulder, I have two things I want to introduce you to. One is this Jane symbol. It has a swastika on it, so I just don't want you thinking it's a Nazi symbol. It's a Jane symbol. It goes in the other direction, the Nazi one, and it's an auspicious symbol of time and karma, fate, destiny. And this symbol of the Jane stands for the entire universe. They believe this is the shape of the universe. When you reach enlightenment, you end up at Siddha Loka, which is up here at the top. We're stuck somewhere in the middle, having to learn, bit by bit, how to improve our karma, both individually and collectively. It can only be done by non-violence of thought, word and deed. And as the Taoists say, the sage pays attention to the void. So even in your deep unconscious, if you're feeling and thinking violent thoughts, then I'm afraid you're going to stay down here in this planet. If you want to progress up to the higher worlds, then you have to really shed violence, which is something I've been trying, personally and collectively for a long time, and that's why I'm bothering with these talks. If anyone out there is interested in non-violence and peace, then hopefully you find these useful. So that's the Jane symbol, and then next to it is Mary Magdalene. This sculpture came from Vézelay. Mary Magdalene is, one of my favourite saints. She's the Gnostic student, disciple, wisdom lover of Christ, to be discovered. It's why I set up a Mary Magdalene Studies Association here in France. And I've been to some of the sites associated with her. Vézelay is one of the most important. It's not far from here. And that's where that rather lovely sculpture comes from. So anyway, they're like watching me. They're my line managers, the Janes and the Mary Magdalene tradition. Okay, I'm going to talk first about one of my projects I'm working on, and I've been working on it, the last few weeks with a friend who was here that I've had speak, Sarah, who was from Syria, an artist, and she's done the drawings of these wonderful tarot cards that I'm about to publish by Christmas, I hope. I'm writing the text. So this is a little interview with an author who's in the middle of his author studio. I'm sharing with you, in confidence please, don't spread this too widely, this amazing project I'm doing, which is called the Tarot of the Gods, and it's never been done before. It's a tarot of all the most important male deities in all world religions. And it's featuring amazing, powerful, important deities like Yahweh or Allah, but also, other ones. And like Ptah or Hermes or Thoth or Dagda, the druid one, or Luch, the druid god of light. It's all my old favourites actually, and obviously it's a subjective selection. Which gods do I like, and have I worked with magically and spiritually? So you'll have to wait till it's published. I'm hoping it'll be done by Christmas Eve actually, and it'll be available to purchase for Christmas presents. That's my gift to the world, really, the gods. I give you the gods. From all faiths, Hindu, so you've got Shiva, Brahma, all the great gods of Hinduism, Krishna, etc. Judaism, Islam, and also Shintoism, which is often not really known apart by people in Japan. It is the indigenous religion of Japan. And I discovered it when I got really deeply into religious studies. I lectured in religious studies at the University of London for quite a few years. And I had to really, immerse myself. I knew about Shintoism. I'd read about their cosmology and their sacred scriptures when I was doing my kind of early studies in my early 20s in Calgary, at the University of Calgary. It's absolutely fascinating. It has this scripture called the Kojiki, which is a very ancient scripture. This is pre-Buddhist Japan, right? It's the equivalent of their indigenous pagan religion. So like the Maori religion is the indigenous religion of New Zealand, or the Australian Aboriginal is for Australia, or the Druids are to the Celtic world of Northwest Europe. It was all handed down orally, and it was only written down later after Japan adopted an adaptation of the Chinese alphabet and turned it into the Japanese script. And then they wrote it down. The Empress of Japan at the time encouraged this Kojiki to be written by scholars and Shinto priests. Shinto means the way of the gods. Shen Tao. Tao is the way. Shen is the spirit beings or the gods. And, it is still very important and influential and popular in Japan. Japan has many, many temples, Shinto temples, scattered around in the most sacred and beautiful places. They're to die for lovely, and they always are made of wood. Normally you can't have metal in the construction of these places. They're built of wood and rope and wooden nails, so to speak. And going there takes you back into a different vibe. It's like you touch eternity. I've met Shinto priests at interfaith conferences. I've not yet been to Japan. It's one of my life's ambitions. I'm thinking I might walk across Northern Asia and go on pilgrimage there. That'd be fun. Or get the Trans-Siberian Railway across. But I'd love to go to Japan. I have been to Korea, which isn't that far, but I didn't have time to go to Japan on that visit. So one of the gods I've been looking at is a Shinto god, and he is going to be one of our tarot cards. And he is an amazing god called Izanagi. Now, Izanagi is a creator god. He actually is the origin of me, you, everything on earth. Water, fire, the whole caboodle. He's the creator. He's like the Elohim in the Bible. The Elohim create the earth and the heavens and all that is therein. Well, Izanagi does that for us. Now, in the Kojiki, he comes later in the story. There are 6 generations of divine beings that precede him. In the 7th generation, Izanagi appears, and he has a consort, Izanami, who he loves, and they're like yin and yang. Japanese religion, like Taoism, believes in the co-fertilization of male and female. The yin-yang symbol concept is also very important in Japanese thought, and it's indigenous to Japan, just as it was to China, just as it is to all pagan religions. All pagan religions love their gods and goddesses. The reason I'm doing a gods tarot is because I feel the gods have been neglected. We have millions of goddess tarots, and virtually every other New Age bookshop has 10 or 20 goddess tarots, and everyone's into their goddesses. And, mea culpa, so am I. But I think we need gods as well. They're the consorts, the mates, the helpers, they're there for their goddesses. And so let's not forget them, especially when there's such conflict in the world between, the followers of the god Yahweh, or the followers of the god Allah, or the followers of the god Holy Trinity, or the followers of the god Shiva, or the followers of the god, etc., etc. So Izanagi, who's the creator god for the Japanese, is the seventh generation of these divine beings, and he and his consort, Izanami, do something rather special. He has a magical spear, a bit like Luh, the druid god of light, and with this magical spear he stirs chaos. And lo and behold, the magical spear drops a few little droplets. Obviously it's a very phallic kind of symbolism, and out of that come the first condensates, come the first things in existence, and he creates from that the first island in the universe. I mean, it's in a magical place, and the couple then descend. They got an island which is shown to this day. It's in the centre of Japan, in an inland sea, off Osaka, not far from Nara, which was the great capital of Japan in those early days. And anyway, on this magical island, the couple come to rest. They build a palace and they make love. They've now got somewhere to make love on. Like, they've got a bed in the palace, and they really go for it. And out of their lovemaking come the rest of Japan, the islands, come the winds, and all kinds of other magical things, including a little sun. They don't really like this little sun. He looks a bit like a kind of, like a bit of a sea creature or something. So they put him on a boat and he goes off and becomes the deity of all fishermen in Japan. They still worship this little boy who grows up to be the patron of fishermen. Okay, and the winds come from their lovemaking and all kinds of other goodies. But then they conceive fire, the god of fire. And that's a tragedy, because the god of fire, when he's being born from Izanami, burns her so much, really hurts her in her most intimate places. Like her vagina catches fire and she dies. Like, this is the first really sad bit of world history. Now, don't forget, this is a creation myth about the origin of humanity and life and everything we know. This bit of the story is a bit like the fall of man. It's where tragedy enters the world. The goddess dies of fire, giving birth to the fire god. I mean, what an extraordinary myth. So she goes into the underworld, and at this point, Izanagi is really heartbroken because his beloved goddess, Izanami, has gone, has died. And he obviously blames himself. He feels, oh God, if only we hadn't invented sex. Because, by the way, these are the first gods who ever make love. Before that, everyone is just mind-born. So, he feels really guilty. He goes down into the underworld, therefore. Now, this bit's very much like Orpheus, or the Persephone stories and so on. He finds his beloved consort, Izanami, down there in hell, in the underworld, surrounded by all kinds of weird shades and funny deities and things. And he pleads with her to come back to the overworld, back to, the magical place of Japan, and they can get on with their work and their lovemaking. She says, no, I can't come back. Why? Well, because I've eaten down here. And that's exactly like the Persephone myth. She can't leave Pluto in the underworld all the time because she's already eaten some of a pomegranate. It's the same myth. And, there are scholars of religious studies that say that this Japanese creation story probably goes back to an earlier pan, you know, Asian, European, worldwide mythology that they pick up similar motifs in different cultures. So anyway, Izanagi has to accept this, no, his wife's not coming back. And indeed, as he looks at her, he sees that she's actually pretty grotesque. She actually is like, you know, dead. And all her allure and sexiness have all gone. She's now like a really horrible, ferocious hag type person. And he flees from her. He's terrified at this point. Like, where's my wife gone? God, she's turned into a horrible hag. He flees. She pursues him with various demons from the underworld, and they nearly catch him. But he gets out just in time and slams the door to hell shut with a great boulder. I mean, this is a great story. You know, it's probably been made into lots of cartoons in Japan. That's what they do with that. Every Japanese boy and girl knows this story. And it informs the whole Shinto worldview. Anyway, so Izanagi back on Earth, back in Japan, lost his consort. Well, he feels very like filthy. He's been in the underworld. There are lots of cobwebs, lots of demons. It was a horrible experience. So he does his ablutions. He goes to a river, and he washes, and he purifies himself. And as he's doing it, he creates the sun from his right eye. Try washing your eyes and maybe the sun will appear. This is high magic, right? And then he creates the moon from his left eye. He's washing, he's doing his ablutions. All religions say to wash and cleanse. Islam says cleanse before you pray. All faiths want you to be clean. So Japan is the same. You should cleanse under running water. And the sun and the moon come into being. Then he cleanses his nose, and from that come the seas, the oceans, all the waters of the earth, the great rivers. I mean, this is a god we're talking about, Izanagi. And then, as if that's not enough, he combs his hair with a kind of comb of teeth. And then some break and he scatters the teeth, and from that come the men and women of the world. That's you and me. Now, this is a very interesting motif. Why? Why from the teeth of a comb? It's the same motif that Cadmus is involved with in Thebes and the creation of humanity. Cadmus and Harmonia, in Greek myth, create humans also from the teeth of a comb. It's very odd that there should be exactly the same analogy at opposite ends of Eurasia, probably round about the same time. Although the Kojiki is written down later, it probably orally goes back to the Bronze Age. I suppose the idea of a comb is that it's like a row of things that are more or less equal, that it's useful, and that it can comb the hair of a god or goddess. I mean, so folks, that's where we're from. We're supposed to be helping the gods, at their beautification process. Well, I don't have a problem with that. A good combing is a jolly good thing. But I expect behind it there's something more metaphysical, and I'll let you work that out. So anyway, there is Izanagi. He's created all this, and it's a beautiful story, actually. I won't say more about it now because I want to save some of the secrets I'm sharing for the tarot book. I would say that he is the card for the magician. Him and his magic spear that create, life, and his love. He stands for the magician in the tarot of the gods. And, as Gwydion did for the Druids. And of course, I'm cross-referencing in this Tarot of the Gods my work on magical peacemaking and the whole idea of peace magic, which no doubt, hopefully you've seen or read. I've coined this phrase of peace magic. I'm the first intellectual, the first scholar, the first, white magician to even put these two words together, which I find completely ridiculous. And it comes out of years of studying war studies and the fact that warriors often are doing magic. I mean, intelligence agencies trying to steal wisdom of the gods to do their war fighting and so on. I mean, we know the Nazis were doing that, the Churchill's lot were doing it, the Americans were doing it, the Japanese were doing it. And I'm saying, no, enough is enough. No more black magic, please, used for militarism. Let's invent a new thing called peace magic. Let's draw the magic power of Izanagi and the spirit of love, but let's use it solely for peace. There were some Japanese Shintoists who went slightly bonkers in the early 20th century, and it led to the imperialist kind of expansion of Japan, which led to World War II. And that led, ultimately, that conflict, to the dropping of the atomic bomb. Tragically, horrendously. A beautiful city, Hiroshima, was destroyed, and Nagasaki. And, obviously these were crimes against humanity. And the reason they did it is they were so terrified, the Allies, that, the Japanese would win or fight to the death. I mean, they were terrified of the courage of the Japanese warriors. Of course, in my opinion, World War II should never have happened, nor World War I. I mean, I'm just against war. I'm a peace magician. I don't know where I was at the time, which incarnation, or maybe I was busy on some other planet, but I don't know why World War I and World War II were allowed to happen. Who is in charge on this planet? Where are the senior peace magicians, please? Get them to get in touch, because we have to stop World War III. World War I and World War II, well, I couldn't stop them, but I can help stop World War III. And that's what my talks here and my publications are dedicated to. So, okay, that's what I wanted to say. I just want to add a couple of things, a bit of detail, colour. I have here beside me the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. Might be talking about that. And I have here the Red Book of Carl Jung, if you can see it, with some of his illustrations. Jung is a great hero of mine. He was a peace magician in his own, absolutely. And I knew people that worked with him and met him. He's obviously an older generation than me. But what I discovered that's very interesting, doing some research on tarot studies, because my tarot deck is going to be quite scholarly for those that are interested in that. I've gone into all possible theories about the origin of the tarot. I will be sharing that in the book. And I've looked at all the great tarot scholars, going right back to the 18th century in France, when Antoine Kor de Gebelin, one of my other intellectual heroes, first published his amazing book, Le Monde Primitif comparé avec le Monde Moderne. Now, he was actually Swiss, from Lausanne. His father had been a Protestant minister in Lausanne, but who then ministered to some of the rebels in the Cevennes in the south of France who were fighting the kind of absolutist state of Catholic imperialism, armed with the French sword at the time. And these little prophets in the Cevennes were trying to say, no, everyone can access God. You don't have to go through the priest. Like, let's be a brotherhood of equals, a brotherhood of light. And stupidly, the Catholic monarchs sent their armies to crush them. It's a heroic and often unknown little struggle of the little people against the big people. And this chap, his father was a minister to them. It's a sad story, actually. They were all killed and hunted down in the end. And the Catholics won because they had like a massive army, but they put up a heroic resistance. Anyway, Antoine Kor was the son of the pastor in Lausanne. He eventually ended up in Paris. And he was a polymath, an intellectual. He studied philosophy, religions, languages, theology, and he himself was a pastor of the Protestant churches in Paris. And he became a friend of the intelligentsia at the time. He was a friend of Voltaire, he was a friend of the Enlightenment thinkers that congregated in Paris. And they were formed into a Masonic lodge under this chap, Lalande, who was an astronomer. And everyone joined this Masonic lodge. And my other hero, Nicholas Hans, Professor of Education at the University of London, called it the UNESCO of the 18th century. And everyone who was anybody in the Enlightenment world joined this Lodge of the Nine Sisters being the Nine Muses. And since I live and am based here in the Museum of the Muses, just down the road from Paris, it seems like fitting that, I should honour Antoine Kor. He was the secretary of this lodge, so he was in correspondence with them all. The name list is amazing. There were members in Spain, in Russia, in Britain, Jeremy Bentham, Joseph Priestley. In America, there was Thomas Paine, who moved there, but there was Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, who became the Grand Master of this lodge, right? Now, it's a who's who of the Enlightenment. Helvetius was another member. The people in Spain were the ones that founded the Spanish Enlightenment. People in Russia founded the Russian Enlightenment, and so on. And Antoine Kor, the secretary at the middle of the whole thing, what did he do in his spare time? Well, he wrote this extraordinary 9-volume work called The Ancient World Compared to the Modern World. He wanted to know, were we moderns cleverer or not compared to the ancient world? Where do we stand? I mean, people like Graham Hancock, who's written this book, Magicians of the Gods, says, no, the ancients were cleverer. They were all magicians. We're just Johnny-come-latelys. And we've lost everything because a meteor hit the world about 10,000 BC. He may or may not be right. I suspend judgment. I haven't met Graham Hancock. I'm not convinced by the arguments. Graham, if you've got definite proof, get in touch. I think Antoine Kor also he did feel that the ancient civilizations were worth bothering with. And that's why he scratched away in etymology, and he loved particularly Druid and Celtic civilizations. He was a bit of a Druid, Antoine. And he discovered that most of the rivers of Europe, particularly in France, are named after Celtic place names. He discovered all these old Druid place names across Europe, and that really got him going. He was also fascinated by the Etruscan civilization, which of course hadn't been, translated. We didn't know how to read its script. But he felt that was at the mystery of the rise of Rome, and he's right. They've just, by the way, cracked the mystery of the Etruscans. There's been 200 years of studies into where they came from. I think science has now realised they actually didn't come from anywhere. They were indigenous. The Etruscans were always there, and they just evolved under the inspiration of trade, from Greece and Asia and so on. But they were the indigenous Italian people. So, anyway, the other thing that Antoine did in his wonderful book, which the first volumes were dedicated to Marie Antoinette, who was the Queen of France at the time, and Voltaire became a member of this lodge. It really is worth studying. And he published a thing about the tarot in this. It was the first time that any intellectuals had really taken the tarot seriously. Although it was circulating in Masonic hands, people like Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin and Martinez Pasquale and other Masonic intellectuals of the 18th century already knew about the tarot and were using it. And then it got into the hands of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, and Antoine wrote the first proper study of it, where it came from, and he said, this is a powerful occult divinatory tool which descends ultimately from the Hermetic mysteries and goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. And he published another article in the same thing by an aristocrat intellectual friend of his, which then said that's true, and the tarot can also be correlated with the Hebrew alphabet and with the Kabbalah. And he explained in that article exactly how that can be done. So I think Antoine Kor realised that these tarot are very, very ancient, and go back to an ancient source. They have something to do with the Kabbalah, something to do with ancient Hermetic Egyptian wisdom. And there the matter rested. And, people have been publishing and writing about this ever since and trying to figure out. One interesting theory is that the tarot were using iconography that was around at the late medieval period of the 1400s in Europe. Because the first cards known to have appeared, manifested around that time, 1370s. In Florence, it's the first tarot deck that is known. And the claim is made by an American PhD academic in a wonderfully researched book, is that the iconography of the tarot exemplify the expected end of the world in the mind of European Christian monks and intellectuals in around about 1400. Because he's discovered it was very early, sort of first breath of the circulation of manuscripts and woodblock printing and so on. And he's discovered that there were these images which showed the end of the world, and they'd become standardized. And one of the books about them by a monk in France reproduces illustrations that are almost identical to the later tarot illustrations. And so he puts two and two together and says, well, that's the origin of the tarot. It's a plausible theory, and I explore this in my book. There's another parallel theory, as these things always happen, which is the tarot actually the encoding of the esoteric wisdom of the Cathars, who were around a little bit before the tarot appeared. And so they wanted to encode their esoteric wisdom, their Gnostic wisdom, and they devised the tarot, which were first produced in the south of France around that time. It is claimed that the Avignon papacy had copies of these tarot. And we know that the Avignon papacy were very interested in esoteric stuff. Actually, one of them was one of the worst inquisitors against the Cathars, who was a bishop responsible for persecuting a lot of Cathars. So, but yes, maybe they stole their thunder, they stole their fire. So anyway, I go into all this, and it's unknown. I can only suspend judgment. My book is not a promotion of this or that theory. The fact is that these cards, the playing cards aspect of the tarot, were also being used in the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt at the time, and also before that in Persia, in the Shia Muslim world. So, throughout Asia, these kinds of playing cards were already in use. And in fact, the very earliest ones seem to go back to China. They found evidence that in the Tang dynasty, in about 600 AD, the Chinese were printing cards for playing games with. And then the kind of Middle East peoples, the Arabs and Persians, took up the idea. And eventually that came to Europe, but not until about 1300. Because the Chinese also invented paper, which meant you could manufacture the cards, right? That was how they made them. But that doesn't explain the origin of the esoteric symbolism. So I've gone into all that. And one thing I discovered that I want to share, which I think is exciting, and this is why I showed you Carl Jung's Red Book. In Germany at the time of Jung, there was a lot of interest in the tarot. And people who were friends of his were, deeply immersed in tarot studies. And it's a thing of great perplexity to me.